This episode is brought to you by the Conscious Combo Network and the Black Boy Fly Club. Go to www.blackboyfly.club to learn about the movement, get books, merch, and just get connected with the brand overall. Again, www.blackboyfly.club. I hope you enjoy the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Black Boy Fly podcast. So much love and support has been shown to this movement since the book came out last year. And this podcast is just another extension of the Black Boy Fly brand. So I really appreciate everybody that's tuned in. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Will Smith, Chris Rock, the 2022 Oscars, and the slap that was heard all around the world. All right, so check it out. I'm a person that advocates for compassion always. So let me just start off by saying that I have a lot of compassion and empathy for Will Smith in terms of what he may have been processing in that moment before he went up on stage, and then even what he spoke about after he got off stage, and probably how he's feeling, sometime after the event has transpired. We often judge people by their actions, and we make that one thing about the whole person. And I want to refrain from doing that in this particular conversation. Will Smith is an actor that I love and respect. He's made groundbreaking films, but like me, he's also a black man that has dealt with challenges, and he's human. All right. So I want to extend grace to this brother because I can't imagine what it's like to be in his shoes and be under the scrutiny that he lives under constantly, and how that might impact him in terms of his emotional and mental health. Now, let's just talk a little bit about what happened, and I'll share some thoughts and perspectives on how, as men, we often are put in positions where we don't necessarily get to process it fully before it happens. All right. So if you didn't watch the 2022 Oscars, right, Chris Rock, he's on stage, he's announcing another category of winners, and in true Chris Rock fashion, he starts cracking jokes. He makes a joke. He makes a comment about Jada Pinkett Smith's bald head, and about the G.I. Jane 2 film. Now, initially, it was funny. Obviously, the camera shows her reaction. Will initially laughs, but in that moment, he probably had a lot to unpack, and it showed in his actions as he went on stage. And essentially, he physically assaulted Chris Rock on live television. All right. Now, there are so many thoughts and perspectives about whether Chris Rock was right or wrong, and whether Will Smith was right or wrong. But let me just talk about it from this perspective. All right. Will Smith is at the Oscars sitting front row, really right in front of the stage, because he is up for Best Actor for King Richard. All right. Now, when this movie comes out, the buzz is instant. Will Smith is likely going to be not only nominated, but win his first Oscar for his portrayal of Venus and Serena Williams' father. Very important film, very important role. So much meaning comes into how Will stepped in and took over the role of a black man and a black father who believed in his daughters, and people thought he was crazy. So there's just so much meaning there, right? Also, Will Smith had been nominated twice before and had not won Best Actor for Ali, as well as for The Pursuit of Happiness, where he portrayed Chris Gardner. So in my mind, this is Will Smith's biggest career opportunity, or biggest career moment. This is historic. Your third opportunity to be recognized by your peers in the movie business, possibly win an Oscar award. So it's just the magnitude of the night was not lost on me, and it wasn't lost on many other people. All right. A lot of folks were paying attention. So now, taking everything I just said into consideration, when a guy who you may or may not have had some history with comes on stage and makes a joke about your wife, from the outside looking in, someone can say, why did he react that way? But what we really don't know is how his wife felt about that based on their interactions at home and based on her battle with hair loss and alopecia, which she obviously recently announced or some time ago announced, right? So my guess is Will is processing all of that hurt and pain that he saw his wife go through, maybe even in private, in that particular moment. And when he sees her reaction to it, he loses it. All right. Now, definitely can relate because, as a black man in America, there have been times where I have lost my cool. And I'm the type of person that is typically very calm and very reserved, and I process things in a very methodical way. But sometimes your emotions can get the best of you and you react before you think. I think as all human beings, we go through that. The only difference is Will Smith is a multimillionaire, one of the highest paid actors in America. And so his actions are magnified. But many of us battle with the ability to manage our emotions on a regular basis. And so that's why I want to extend grace to Will, because what he experienced in that moment is not anything that any of us likely have not experienced at many other times in our lives. But to me, there's something so much deeper happening, because the magnitude of the night and the historic nature of what's happening, juxtaposed with Will losing his cool essentially in that moment, it really says a lot about what he may be processing just mentally, right? You got to think about it. He finished a role in which he had to assume a character. And from what I know about the movie business, sometimes these actors and actresses go into really dark places to pursue these characters. He comes out of that. We hear about I Am Legend 2, which is a sequel to another film that has a very dark undertone. Maybe he's in character or coming out of that character. He's processing all this, plus what's happening around him, plus all the other things that have been said in the media about his family. And it all comes to a head in that one moment where he storms the stage and slaps Chris Rock. Now, here is where I kind of wish that things had been handled differently. All right, it happened. It is what it is. But let me just speak on a few things. One, as a black man in America, we are under a lot of scrutiny, and our actions are placed under a microscope more so than that of our peers. We almost can't afford to lose our cool in pivotal moments like that. All right. He mentioned that Denzel Washington made a comment to him to the effect of, at your highest moment, the devil will appear. I just want to share with anybody listening to this, but especially other black men, we are under a lot of pressure at times. We're facing a lot. We're dealing with a lot. We're managing a lot. But the world does not often give us the grace that we may deserve in those moments when we lose our cool. And I feel like we have to really think and put ourselves in a position where we have a strong and sound mental mind state, so that when things do come our way, we're in a position to handle it, because our failures in public are often magnified, and we're not always able to bounce back and recover from those things. All right. Now, Will Smith being a multi-million-dollar actor, he's likely going to be fine. But if I were to have some type of public meltdown in that way, it may be very difficult for me to recover from that, especially when you compare that to maybe my peers of other backgrounds, ethnicities. We just aren't, as black men, able to recover from those types of mistakes or those types of public lapses of judgment. And that's why it's so important that we are in a position of sound mind and mental and emotional health. It's critical because our failures are magnified, our mistakes are magnified, and it can often be the end of us. And I hate to say that, it's just the truth. All right. And so for anybody that's watching this podcast, let's give grace to anybody who is dealing with whatever they may be dealing with. Let's give grace to folks that have public lapses of judgment, emotional breakdowns, emotional outbursts, because we're human and we deal with things. But for my black men specifically, just understand that the world in which we live in does not often extend us that grace. And we may not be able to bounce back like our peers when these types of things happen to us. And that's why in that moment, I wished that Will had been able to maybe process it or interact or engage in that interaction in a different way, because I understand what that means for me as a black male, right? They're going to look at what Will Smith did and say, okay, they're going to make that Oscar moment about two black men having a negative interaction in a very public place, one of the most viewed events on television so far this year. It carries so much more meaning for people that look like me when we see actions like that take place. Again, Will Smith is not perfect. No one's perfect. But I just wish that that interaction had gone differently because of what it represents for the culture, because of what it represents for me. And that's something that I carry, and that's something that I'm aware of. When I move around in the world and when I navigate society, I understand that my actions or lack thereof may have an impact on other black men. My performance in a career position may set a precedent for what other black men may or may not be allowed to do in that same career opportunity in the future. I'm totally aware of it. Is it fair? No. Is it just? No. Is it the way the world is? Yes. And as black men, we're often held to that higher standard. But I believe that with strong emotional control, understanding our mind, dealing with whatever underlying issues exist, we can position ourselves to get the best of situations like that instead of allowing those situations to get the best of us. Okay. Again, I want to reiterate, I'm not advocating for perfection, and I'm not advocating for us to live lives where we don't make mistakes. That's inhumane. I think it's just a part of who we are. It's just that as a black man, the consequences for us tend to be so much greater, and we don't get that same room for error. And unfortunately, when we have our public lapses of judgment or we lose emotional control, not only do we pay for it, other black men around us pay for it as well. So our actions have larger implications larger than just how it may impact us. And as a black man who has been in many different professional environments, I understand the weight of that. I understand what I have to carry. I understand that expectation, and I act accordingly. All right. I've been in situations in work settings, in professional settings, where someone may not have spoken to me in a proper tone or manner, or someone may have said something out of bounds. But in those moments, instead of choosing violence, as they say, I take the Michelle Obama approach. When they go low, we go high. And the reason is because I understand that in those moments, no one is going to extend that grace to me. I'm going to be looked at as another angry black man that lacks emotional control, that has, high emotional instability. That's not who I am. That's not how I want to be characterized. And I know that my actions can be magnified in that way. So I have to really think about how I engage and how I respond. Now, I've had this conversation with my wife. I've had this conversation with other brothers in my circle, and the reviews are mixed. Some folks think that Will Smith did the right thing, and many women agree. Many men agree. My wife and I tend to share the same perspective in terms of how, we felt like that should have been handled different. And I get both sides of the equation, but I'm going to always advocate for an approach and for us to move about the world in a way where we control the narrative around us as much as we can. And we don't let emotional lapses of judgment allow other people to then take control of the narrative around us and reshape it in a way. Because that's essentially what's happening today. If you tune in and you're paying attention to what the media conversation is, the focus of it is, they're talking a lot about Will Smith and his actions, and he gave them the power to be able to drive the narrative about him. And that's something that as a black man, I never want to do. I don't ever want to put someone else in the driver's seat of who I am so that they can shape that narrative. I'm going to do my best to move about the world in a way where I understand my power, who I am, but also what I represent and who I represent with my actions and the things that I do, and understanding that people aren't going to necessarily give me the same grace. All right. I fully believe that if that were not Chris Rock and it were someone of different ancestry, Will Smith doesn't go up on stage and engage in that way. I also believe that if it were someone of a different background and Will Smith did what he did, he gets escorted out. All right. I also believe that if that were two actors of different ethnicities, they're non-black, it's a very different conversation today. As black men, we're often held to a much higher standard than our peers. We have to be aware of that. It's not necessarily right. And I've talked to brothers and they say, I don't agree. And, social norms are things that we shouldn't necessarily adhere to. But the fact of the matter is, as black men, there are often consequences for the things we do or don't do. And those consequences are often much higher. We pay a much stiffer penalty. And because of that, we just have to be aware of how we move around in the world. Now, let me just kind of wrap up by saying this. I wish that we could rewind this whole situation and give Will another opportunity to redo it. Now, he may exactly do the same thing he did, but I wish that he had done this. I wish that he goes up on stage and instead of smacking Chris Rock, he uses that platform as an opportunity to, one, speak about his wife's diagnosis and talk about how that joke wasn't funny because this is what Jada has endured and this is how she feels about it, and use that as an opportunity to further empower black women or other women in general that are dealing with the same thing. That would have been great. He even could have gone back to his seat and cussed Chris Rock out, and that's fine. But to physically assault another grown man on television when you are Will Smith and you have, a lot of young people that follow you and admire you, I really feel like that's a moment that he probably wishes he could get back. I don't know the brother. He might be fully convicted in his actions, but my guess is he wishes he could get that back because it represents so much more than just that moment for the black culture and for black men specifically. All right. And his actions create a lens through which we all may be judged through now. And again, it's not right. Don't necessarily agree with how things are, but it is what it is. And if we want to continue to thrive and create opportunities for our community, I do think that we have to understand our power. We have to understand our influence, and we have to wield it in the most careful way possible, understanding that we're human and we're prone to mistakes, but also knowing that as black men, our mistakes are often magnified. All right. So that's my thoughts on what's happening with Will Smith. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about the podcast in general. Again, thanks to everybody that's watched an episode of this podcast. You can subscribe on YouTube. It's available on all the podcast platforms. Go to blackboyfly.club to learn more about the movement. Catch you on the next episode.